So welcome to In the Morning, the 7-minute devotional to start your day right. We are in Psalm 131. We're in part 4 of a 4-part series, so we're wrapping it up today, called The Path to Peace. The Path to Peace. This is all based on Psalm 131, which is entitled, "But I have calmed and quieted my soul." What an astounding statement by David, that he could arrive at that conclusion. And so here's what we've learned thus far, that the path to peace starts with, you know the answer. Type it into the box. The path to peace starts with prayer. Hey, if you missed any of the previous 4 or 3 teachings on the path to peace, you can always go back and watch them on the Own the Morning page. And if you miss it in the morning live, you can go back to the Own the Morning page and watch it there. The path to peace starts with prayer. See, in Psalm 131, David starts like this: "Oh Lord." He starts in prayer. David doesn't take his peace problem outward first. He takes it upward to God. The path to peace starts with prayer. And then David, in verse 2, says this: "I have calmed and quieted my soul." David takes personal responsibility for his own peace. I hope this week you have too. You've taken responsibility for your own peace, because the path to peace starts with prayer. Now, in David's prayer, he says 3 things. He says first that his heart is not lifted up. His heart is not lifted up because he has learned the art of humility. David knew humility because he was aware of his own sinfulness and his need for grace. He knew the character of God, and he had faced many battles, and those battles hadn't hardened him, they had humbled him. Secondly, David says, "My eyes are not raised too high." David wasn't looking too far into the future. He wasn't always looking back, and his eyes weren't shifting to the left or to the right. He had fixed his gaze. And then in his third statement in Psalm 131, David says this: "But I do not occupy myself with thoughts too high or marvelous for me." David now is talking about controlling his thinking. Let me give you this statement. If you can't control it, don't let it control your thinking. If you can't control it, don't let it control your thinking. We're in Psalm 131 this morning, part 4 in the path to peace. If you can't control it, don't let it control your thinking. If you can't control this element of your health, don't let this element of your health control your thinking. If you can't control this person, don't let that person control your thinking. There was a time in my life when I was caught in a destructive thought pattern, and I was always asking the same 3 questions, and it was something completely out of my control, and it was destroying my peace. If you can't control it, don't let it control your thinking. The first question I was always asking is when. God, when is this going to happen? I was always wondering when. In James chapter 4, he talks about an individual who was wondering when. And this individual said, "Tomorrow I'm going to go and I'm going to start a business and make a lot of money." And James goes, "How do you know? You might die tomorrow." Kind of believe. He said, "You don't know when things are going to happen. Instead of wondering when, trust God's will," James says. He says, if it's God's will, it could happen. Instead of always wondering when, trust God's will and his timing. We're in part 4 in the path to peace in Psalm 131. The second question I was always asking myself is why? God, why isn't this happening? Why has it been so slow? God, why hasn't it happened the way I wanted it to happen? Why? And the why was destroying my peace. In Romans chapter 9, there's this hypothetical conversation between a Christian and God. And the Christian is asking God, why? And Paul responds on God's behalf and says, what is it to you? What if God wants to do this? What if God wants to do that? What if God doesn't want to do it the way that you think it should be done? Instead of asking why, trust God's sovereignty. Trust his plan. Trust his way. I kept asking why. It was destroying my peace. I needed to just trust God's sovereignty. The third question I found myself asking frequently in this destructive mind pattern was, well, what about them, God? It's working for other people. How come it's not working for me? Other people are making progress. How come I'm not making progress? And I kept asking or comparing myself to other people in similar situations. John and Peter are talking with Jesus or around Jesus at the end of the Gospel of John, and Jesus says something to Peter, and then Peter looks at John and goes, well, what about him? And Jesus, in essence, looks at Peter and goes, don't worry about him. Worry about yourself. When I was constantly comparing and contrasting myself with other people, it was destroying my peace. I can't control them, and I can't control what God wants to do with them, so I'm not going to let them or what happens with them control my thinking. See, if you can't control it, don't let it control your thinking. David has taught us in Psalm 131 that the path to peace starts with prayer. Our hearts can't be too lifted up. How do we stop that? We humble ourselves by looking at Jesus on the cross. He says our eyes can't be raised too high. How do we stop that? We fix our eyes on Christ. He is our life now, Paul says in Colossians. And we can't occupy ourselves with two things great or too marvelous for us. We can't occupy with ourselves with things that are outside of our control. So how do we avoid that? We think about what Paul told us to think about in Philippians. Whatever is good and pure and noble and true. In other words, we think about Christ. And when we do that, then we can arrive where David arrived, where we can calm and quiet our souls, where our peace is not dependent upon other people. It's not dependent upon our circumstances or our situations, but it is an inward peace that we can arrive at and take responsibility for. David ends with saying, our hope is in the Lord. The only way we can do this is through Jesus and his gospel. This has been a 4-part series on the path to peace. If you missed any of the previous 3, go back and watch them. I hope this talk on peace has helped you. If you think there's someone in your life who could use some peace in their life, make sure you tag them or tell them about Own the Morning. We're here every morning at 7:30 a.m. You have owned the morning. Now you can own your day. Go live for God's glory. If you missed the talk, start the video back over. Make sure you catch it. Our 4-part series on the path to peace.